y'all, welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video. If you've been watching my videos for a bit, or if you know me, then you probably know that summer is by far my favorite season. This time of year is always a little hard because I hate saying goodbye to my favorite time of year, but I will say fall doesn't make it too difficult because it is a very close second in terms of being my favorite time of year. And I feel like the things I love the most about fall are captured really well in so many books. I love the atmosphericness, I love the coziness, and I just love the vibes that this season brings. And I feel like there's so many books that capture those elements really well, and they're perfect to kind of enhance the mood when you read them this time of year. So I am excited to recommend you guys some books today that I feel are perfect to read during the fall. I did film a fall book rec video last year, so if you want even more recs, definitely check that video out. I didn't want to repeat too many books, but there are a few that I just couldn't leave off of this year's list because I'm obsessed with them. They're so perfect for fall and I need you guys to read them. So with all that, let's hop into all the book recommendations. I have split these recs up by genre, and I do want to start out with the romances just because I'm such a big romance reader, and I feel like romance isn't a genre you usually associate with fall, but the ones I have to recommend you guys I think are perfect for the season. The first one being The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. This one follows our main character Florence, who is a ghostwriter for this really famous romance author, but in her personal life she is going through a breakup, so in her writing she's finding it really hard to come up with a happy ending for the characters for the book she's working on. She's also in the process of getting a new editor who is very much a stickler for the rules, and he is not giving her any leeway in terms of extending the deadline for when she needs to have this book finished. And in the process of all this that she's going through, she ends up getting a call and she has to go back home to attend to a family matter. Her family is actually in the funeral industry and they run a funeral parlor, so she's always kind of grown up around funerals and around death. And this book has a magical realism element to it as well, in that Florence can actually speak to ghosts. I would say this book is like magical realism, literary fiction, women's fiction, but there very much is a strong subplot of romance where Florence has a little romance with this grumpy new editor. This ended up being the very first book that I picked up last fall, and it was the most perfect way to kick off the season. It just made me so in the mood for all things fall, all things spooky, without being really like a scary, thrilling type of book. All the little elements, I feel like the funerals, her talking to ghosts, her being a ghostwriter, all of those things just make it perfect for the fall season. The next romance I have to recommend is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This follows our main character Nora, who is a literary agent. Some would say she's very cutthroat. She's very much career focused though. It's been consuming her life, so her sister recommends that they go on a little getaway sister's trip to this small town in North Carolina. It's actually the setting for one of their favorite books. When she's there, she ends up running into a guy that she knows who also works in the book industry named Charlie. Every interaction that they've had with one another has not been good. They just don't really get along, and she's like, what is he doing here? It comes to find out that he's actually from this small town, and it ends up following their romance. While normally I would very much recommend Emily Henry's books for the summertime, and they do take place during the summer, this book in particular of hers I would say feels the most fall. I think because both of our main characters work in New York and they very much feel like city people, so the juxtaposition of them in this small town, I don't know, New York just always gives me fall vibes, and they bring that energy to the small town, and then the coziness of the small town and the things that they do when they're there just very much give off fall energy. I also think books being one of the main elements of the story also kind of gives that coziness. I feel like this book in particular of all of Emily Henry's books has just a different vibe to it. It feels a little bit different, the setting, the characters. This book very much does focus on the sister relationship as a subplot, and all the elements I feel are just perfect to cozy up with this fall and read. Next, I want to recommend a college hockey romance that is one of my favorites. It is an OG, so if you haven't read it yet, I would pick it up during the fall time. This book follows Hannah Wells and Garrett Graham. Garrett Graham is our captain, star of the hockey team at this college, and his grades are suffering a little bit, so he ends up approaching Hannah Wells, who is our studious straight A gal, and he asks for Hannah to tutor him. Hannah is very put off by Garrett Graham because he has this reputation of being like a playboy, but Garrett ends up making a deal with Hannah that if Hannah agrees to tutor him, he will help her get with the football player that she has a crush on. Since they're both athletes, they run in the same circles, so he says he can help her out in that way. And of course, in the process, the romance ends up being between the characters you might not initially think would work together at the beginning. I just feel like because this book is a college romance, for some reason that that just gives me back to school fall vibes. I love all the scenes of them at college parties, going to classes. It just feels very like academic, which gives me fall vibes for sure. This is one of my favorite romances. I love the character development and the arcs in both of our main characters and the way that they help one another out. I absolutely loved and adored reading about. If you have not yet discovered the hockey romance scene, this will for sure get you into it. Next, I have a YA romance trilogy to recommend you guys, and that is the To All the Boys I've Loved Before trilogy by Jenny Han. This one follows our main character, Lara Jean, and she has always written a letter to every boy that she's ever had a crush on. When she's ready to move forward and close the chapter on her feelings, she writes these letters to these boys as like a diary entry, and she keeps them locked away in her room. But somehow one day, every letter that she's ever written gets sent to all the boys that she's written them to, and it follows the aftermath from there. Again, this trilogy gives me fall vibes because it's back to school. You get lots of scenes following Lara Jean throughout her school year, and then as it comes to a close, you see her like applying to colleges. It very much feels coming of age, and you're following her growth throughout this school year. I absolutely loved and adored Lara Jean. She's one of my favorite main characters that I've ever read about. The family dynamics in here, the sister relationships were just so sweet to read about. I loved all the characters. I also love that the romance in here isn't especially obvious. I never really knew who she was going to end up with until the very end, and I really liked that element of suspense. It just kept me reading the whole way through. I would also recommend this trilogy on audio. The audiobooks are so well done, and yeah, I just loved following Lara Jean and her journey and her growth throughout the school year. Next, I have some fantasy books to recommend you guys. I'm not the biggest fantasy reader, so these are very much beginner level, I would say. If you are interested in dipping your toe into the genre, I feel like these books would be a good place to start. And to me, fantasy and fall just go hand in hand. So the first recommendation is so basic, I know, but if you've not yet read it, I think now would be such a good time to try it out. Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This book follows our main character, Violet Sorrengail, and we're following her as she attends this war college. At this college, there are 4 different quadrants or different things you can choose to study. Violet has always wanted to be and planned to be a scribe and go into the scribe quadrant, which they basically keep records of everything and write down all the history. But Violet's mother is this very powerful, well-known war general, so she kind of forces Violet to go into the writer's quadrant, which is the most dangerous and deadliest of the 4 quadrants. So we are following Violet as she is training to become a dragon rider. This book was such a perfect beginner fantasy book for me. I loved all the characters in here. Violet I found to be very relatable, and I loved following her on her journey at this college. The setting was just so fun and so fantastical, and my favorite part, of course, was the dragons. I also feel like now is such a great time to pick this one up because all the hype has kind of died down, so you can kind of go into it with an open mind if you're interested to see how you feel about it for yourself without all the hype kind of affecting your judgment. Because I know sometimes when I go into a super hyped up book, it kind of changes my expectations a little bit, for better or for worse sometimes. But also now is a great time to start this series because book 3 comes out in January. So I feel like if you start it now, that gives you the perfect amount of time to read book 1 and then book 2 and have them fresh in your mind for when book 3 comes out next year. So highly recommend Fourth Wing. It is one of my favorite fantasy books. I know so many people have read it and it's very basic, but I love it, and I think it's hyped up for good reason. Then I want to recommend the Caraval trilogy by Stephanie Garber. Caraval book 1 follows these 2 sisters, Donatella and Scarlet, and they have always dreamed of going to this magical land of Caraval, which is kind of like this pop-up circus carnival type thing. It just shows up randomly at a different location every year, and it's kind of like a quest scavenger hunt type thing with a prize at the end. It's very exclusive. You do have to be invited to attend. Scarlet has always dreamed of going, so she's written a letter every year to this guy named Legend, who is the creator of Caraval, asking him to go. And finally this year she gets a letter back and she is invited, so she really wants to go. But this year it's a little bit difficult for her because she is supposed to be married off to this man in like an arranged marriage, and she kind of sees it as her escape from her abusive father, so she doesn't want to risk being able to leave him in order to attend Caraval. However, things take a turn when her sister Donatella ends up getting kidnapped, and then the whole goal of Caraval is to find her sister. I have never been so swept up in a world as I was with this book. If you are a Harry Potter fan because you love the magic, and especially Diagon Alley, like all the shops and all the different things that are there, you will love this book because Caraval reminded me so much of that. It was so fun following Scarlet on her journey as she meets all these different kinds of people. You really have this sense of like what's real and what's not, who can she trust, who can't she. It was just such a fun time and so perfect to read this time of year. I have another YA fantasy to recommend, and that is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is actually the start to a duology. I haven't yet read the second one, but I read the first one at the beginning of the year, and I do think, again, it has those magical, fantastical elements that are perfect for the fall time. In this book, we follow Iris and Roman. They both work for the same newspaper, and they're both up for the same promotion, so they're kind of workplace rivals. They both end up having these magical typewriters where they're able to communicate to one another through them. There's definitely an element of suspense because Iris doesn't know who she's sending her letters to, and there's kind of that trope of there being an anonymous person that she's speaking with. Also, in the background to this setting, there is a war between gods and goddesses going on. I loved the setting of this book and the backdrop of the gods and goddesses. Definitely very fantastical and magical feeling. The romance in here is a very big part of why people love this book so much, but I actually preferred the setting and the fantastical elements and the world a lot more than the romance. And I've heard that book 2 kind of focuses more on the world building than the romance, which is why it maybe gets mixed reviews. But I am excited to read book 2 for that reason, because it was a story that was just so easy to get swept up into. Next, it would not be spooky season without thrillers. And I want to start out with some thrillers that are on the lighter side, that I feel like if you get spooked easily, if you're not a big thriller fan, you don't like things that are super dark and scary, but you still want a little bit of suspense there, then these would be perfect for you. The first book I want to recommend is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This book follows our main character June and her best friend Athena, and one night they are hanging out at Athena's place, and Athena tragically ends up dying. Right before Athena passed, she ended up showing June her manuscript for the latest book that she was working on. June ends up stealing this manuscript, taking it as her own, and writing a book based off Athena's work. And one of the big issues with this, aside from obviously June stealing Athena's work and plagiarizing, is that Athena is Chinese and June is a white woman, and this book follows the history of Chinese slave laborers. So there's a lot of commentary in this book on who can tell what stories and on the publishing industry and representation. This book kind of falls into the literary fiction suspense genre. You definitely have those elements of murder and suspense and what's gonna happen next, but it doesn't feel super dark and heavy. I feel like the main driving force of the book are the themes, which R.F. Kuang does so well. I feel like her books are always thematically driven. This book just took so many twists and turns. I never knew where it was going next, and it kept me on the edge of my seat for the whole book. I was just so enthralled by it. I was so invested. I also would highly recommend this one on audio because that's how I read it, and it was just perfect. I think, again, if you want those suspenseful elements but not something too dark and thrilling, this would be a good way to go. Next, I want to recommend One of Us is Dead by Geneva Rose. This book follows this group of very wealthy, privileged women in this affluent area. They all go to the same hairstylist, so you get the hairstylist point of view as she's getting all the tea from these women at their appointments, as well as perspectives from each of the women. There is a murder that takes place in this book, and we're trying to figure out who is murdered and who did it. This one, again, although it is suspenseful and leading up to a murder, so it is a little bit darker, it mostly just had so many comedic elements. The characters very much feel like Mean Girls, Real Housewives type of characters, especially our main character Olivia. These women were just so out of touch that it was just hilarious. Some of like the catty comments they would make, so entertaining, such a fun time. This was one where I didn't really even care about trying to figure out the mystery. I was just enjoying the ride along the way and just having such a fun time listening to these women. This is one that I listened to on audio, and I would highly recommend the audiobook because it has a full cast. Each woman is narrated by a different voice actor, so it does help you differentiate them all, and I just had the best time with this one, especially our main character Olivia. She's very much like a Regina George type of character, so she would just say the most catty things, and it was so out of touch that it was just comical. I love this one, and there also is a Halloween party that the book is leading up to, so I feel like it's perfect for this time of year. And for the last last suspenseful literary fiction book that is not too spooky, not too scary, but does touch on some darker things and definitely has that element of mystery to it. The Good Sister by Sally Hepworth follows these sisters, Rose and Fern. You get both of their point of views and we get past and present timelines. It mostly takes place in the present, but we do get glimpses at their backstory and see what their relationship was like with one another. You kind of see that Rose has always stood up for her sister Fern and has kind of always taken the blame for Fern. And then in the present, you'll see that Rose is trying to have a baby, but she's not able to. So Fern really wants to repay Rose for all the years of kindness and all the good things that she did for her growing up. So she decides that she is going to have a baby for Rose. And I think that's all you need to know, because this book, I just did not expect it to go in the way that it did. I love Fern's character in this so much. She's one of my favorite characters I've ever read from. She very much has her way of doing things. She has her quirks, but she was just so entertaining to read from, and I loved her so much as a character. Also, Sally Hepworth is Australian, so audiobook is the way to go for this one as well, because the Australian accent just adds to the immersiveness of the story and makes it even more entertaining. Okay, moving into thrillers that are a little bit more spooky and scary and thrilling. Starting with Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This is my favorite Riley Sager book, and if you're gonna take away any thriller from this list, let it be this one, because I am obsessed with this book. We are following our main character Maggie, and she is dealing with the aftermath of her father's death. Her father was best known for writing this book about the house that they lived in for a little bit when she was younger. Supposedly this house was haunted. Some people think the book is all a hoax, some people believe it's real, but this house was left to Maggie, so she's going back to the house to clean it up and get it ready to sell after her father's death. I love the way the story is told, because we get chapters of the father's actual book that he wrote about this house, and then in the present you're seeing Maggie at the home as she's there cleaning everything out. Oh my gosh, if you love a haunted house story, this is for you. I read this when I was home alone and I was getting so spooked at every little noise. Anything my cat would be staring at in the distance, I was like, oh my god, there is a ghost in my house. I was so freaked out. This one just is perfect for spooky season, the quintessential fall, October, Halloween read. The next book I want to recommend, also by Riley Sager, is The House Across the Lake. This one follows our main character Casey, who is this recently widowed actress. She has been in the midst of some bad press, so she ends up going to her lake house to kind of hole away for a bit. When she's there, a new couple ends up moving in across the lake from her in this home. The wife in the couple is this famous supermodel, and the husband is this IT guy who created this really well-known app. Casey ends up getting a little bit bored with her day-to-day and being in the house by herself, so she ends up finding a pair of binoculars and kind of spying on this couple. And after a few days of like taking note of their routines and their day-to-day, the wife in the couple, this supermodel, ends up going missing, and she is trying to figure out what actually happened. This book, although it takes place on a lake setting, I thought it would be more summery, but it actually takes place in the month of October. It takes place in Vermont, which to me is quintessential fall setting. The fall foliage is mentioned constantly throughout this one, and it is just very spooky and eerie. The big reveal and climax in this book, I will say, is very hit or miss. This book gets mixed reviews because of the reveal, so it's one that you're either gonna find very entertaining or you're gonna find it very ridiculous, but it is over the top. I found it ridiculous in the best way though. I thought it was such an entertaining read, and I just did not know where it was gonna go next. I could not have predicted what would possibly happen, but I found it to be such an enjoyable thriller. I next want to recommend The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson. I know I will not shut up about this book. I recommend it every chance I get, and I think spooky season would be a perfect time to read it if you have not yet. In this book, we follow Ted and Lily, and they meet one day in this airport bar. They are drinking and talking, and the more that they drink, the more they're spilling secrets about their lives. Ted ends up revealing to Lily that he thinks his wife is having an affair, so he makes this offhand comment that because of this, he wants to kill his wife, and Lily is like, yeah, you should kill your wife and I'm gonna help you. And it is just the craziest, wildest journey from there. A very dark and twisted story with unlikable characters, but they were so interesting to read about. You get both Ted and Lily's perspectives, and you get past and present timelines. Each chapter ends off on a cliffhanger, so I could not put this one down, and I did not predict anything that happened in this book. The ending is a little bit ambiguous, but there is a sequel to this book and also a third book that recently came out, and the second book does give you closure for the ending in this book, so I could not recommend this one enough. It is one of my very favorite thrillers of all time. I also want to recommend the Mindfuck series by St. Abbey. These are 5 novellas that can be read individually, or you can read them bound up into one big book. These books follow our main character, Lana, and Lana is actually a serial killer, but she is a morally great character. You are rooting for her. You understand her backstory and why she's doing the things she's doing. She's not just a bad person for the sake of it and killing people for fun. She definitely has her reasons, and I feel she's a character you root for. And this book is very much thriller / dark romance because she ends up dating the FBI agent who is on her case. This book will have you on the edge of your seat the whole time because you're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it was just so thrilling, so entertaining. Each novella ends off on a cliffhanger that literally had my jaw on the floor. I had to jump into the next book immediately once I finished one. It was just so thrilling. Very, very dark. I would say this one probably has the most dark elements to it out of all the books I've recommended so far, so I would look up trigger warnings for this one. But if you can handle a more gruesome subject matter, I would recommend this one for the fall time. And then I want to end off with some dark academia because it is not fall without dark academia. The first one I want to recommend is In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. In this book, we're following this friend group and we get past and present timelines. In the past, we see them all at the same college and you kind of get their backstories. You get all the characters' point of views and you kind of see how they came to be friends with one another and the dynamic of the group. And one of the friends in the group was actually murdered while they were in college. And then in the present day, it is 10 years later and they're at their college reunion, and a lot of secrets about the murder of their friend start coming to light. I really love this one. I found it to be so entertaining and so thrilling with very, very interesting characters. All the chapters are super short, so it was very hard to put down. I love this one too because dark academia often very much romanticizes college life, and this one kind of touched on how college can sometimes maybe be not the best experience for a lot of people, and people come from different backgrounds. So highly recommend for the fall time, A Perfect Dark Academia. And then I have to recommend If We Were Villains by ML Rio. This one very similar. We're following a group of friends at this theater school, specifically a Shakespeare theater school, where all they study, all they learn about and perform are Shakespeare and his works. In the present, we get the point of view of this guy named Oliver, who is one of the people in the friend group, and he is recounting the story of what happened while he was at this theater school to someone. He's definitely alluding to very dark and bad things happening, but you don't really know what happened. And then in the past, you see this friend group as they are at this school, and it kind of just builds and gets darker the more you read, and you're like, what is going on? This one had me on the edge of my seat the whole time because you really are kept in the dark until the reveal. I just had no clue what was going to happen. It had me guessing until the very last page. One thing about this book is because they go to this Shakespeare school, they're constantly referencing and quoting Shakespeare all the time throughout here, which definitely took a little bit of getting used to. But I'm someone who doesn't really read a lot of Shakespeare. I'm not super familiar with his works, and I definitely find the language hard to understand. But after a few chapters, I definitely got used to it. So if you pick this one up and you're struggling a little bit because of the Shakespeare references, definitely keep going because you will get used to it and you'll still understand everything despite all the Shakespeare. But this one was just so dark and twisted, and I love the characters in here. A lot of unlikable characters, but I found them so interesting, and the dynamic of the friend group was so thrilling to read about. So that is going to conclude this fall book recommendation video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you took away at least one recommendation. If you did, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments below what is on your TBR for the fall. If you have any books you want to recommend me, please do. I'm always looking to add to my TBR. If you're not already subscribed to my channel, make sure you hit the red button down below to stick around. I have so many fun videos and vlogs planned for the fall season, and I would love for you guys to be here. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you so soon in the next one. Bye guys.